Okay, guys, let's get started. Seriously, I'm fascinating. It takes this university like 3 months to fix this stupid microphone here. Yeah. So I think it's just not going to happen this term anymore. So just have to do the best with it. I hope you had a nice little Easter break. It was sort of a nice little time. But now let's go back to the lecture for today. First, I have a couple of announcements, and then what I'm going to do today, I'm going to have a bit of an excursion. So I'm going to talk about actually some of my ongoing research right now, which sort of picks up the thread where we were the last time, talking about social networks and so on, so that you actually see where this is going. But I'll talk more about that later on, and actually it's not going to be relevant for the exam. But I thought it might be interesting for you nevertheless, to hear about, I don't know where you can actually take this. But let me first make a couple of announcements. First of all, keep in mind our next take-home test is around the corner. So the way this is going to be, it's going to be on Blackboard on Friday, and then again you have the weekend to answer all the questions, and there's going to be a hard deadline on Monday at 1 p.m. And the format is going to be exactly the same like the ones that we had last time. So expect, I don't know, maybe there's going to be similar amount of question, but it's certainly going to be very similar in type. But it's going to be about the readings ever since then, right? So more or less the same thing. That helps you to stay on top of the readings, and I think it's a very good preparation for you in order to get ready for the exam, then later around the corner anyway. Okay, but we also had the exam, the assignment a while back. So actually now I got my head around and I started grading the assignment on that. And I'm going to talk much more about the assignment on Friday. So on Friday I'm going to give you a group feedback session on the assignment. And basically, if you're confused, basically I sort of started grading, giving you points. You get 1 out of 20 points. It's just a scale that I'm applying at this particular moment. And then it's going to be translated into a later grade afterwards. So that's sort of like a decision that I'm making afterwards. And so you might have seen a letter grade popping up, but that's just how Blackboard was set up. So you will get the final grade, and I will talk about how I kind of decided on which kind of letter grades correspond to which kind of points on Friday, when I talk about that in more detail. So you see some points there. This is just a relative scale at the particular moment, and it will translate somehow into different points. Also, I don't know. But that's sort of how this stupid Blackboard works. Seriously, I'm figuring out this system by myself, because you have like 200 points for the last take-home test, and now only 20 points for this. Obviously, this thing will be weighted accordingly, so that ultimately it corresponds to the scheme that we had outlined before. That this assignment is going to count for 10% of your overall grade. But in that context, what I'm going to do on Friday, I want to talk a little more about the assignment. So there's going to be a group feedback session on this, where I also want to discuss with you your answers in a way, so that you have an opportunity to maybe understand some of the things that you might have misunderstood, or to outline your solutions for some of the questions. But then I also want to provide the opportunity for an individual feedback session. So that's going to happen next week. So instead of a lecture, there's going to be an individual feedback session where you are free to come by my office, and we sit down and talk about your assignment or anything else course related if you want that. Right? But I thought I provide the opportunity for that. But as you see, okay, now we're at this point where we don't actually introduce new content. There's also, a way of getting you a bit of a breather on this, because I know there are actually a lot of readings that you need to do for this course. So this is sort of now your time to do that. So, but on Friday there's going to be a group feedback session, and then on Tuesday, instead of a lecture, there's going to be an individual feedback session. And so the exam is coming up. Does anybody know the date of the exam? No? God, I should know. I should look these things up. I'll find it out. I'll keep reminding you on Friday about it. So it is happening. I don't know. So at some point in May, maybe mid-May, but don't nail me down on it. But it is happening. And what I also want to do to help you to prepare for the exam, what I always do in my lectures, there's going to be a review session. So that's going to happen at the last lecture, basically, next week. So on Tuesday it's going to be the individual feedback session, and on Friday it's going to be a review session where we kind of look at the whole course and link it to the exam. Yeah. And in that context, I will review some of the things, but I also provide you an opportunity. Seriously, this is sort of your opportunity to I don't know, to tell me what should I review during that. So I have one thing at the moment here. If you want to use that opportunity to tell me what I should focus on at the review session next week, but I will give you another opportunity for that on Friday as well. But it's just really helpful because, I don't know, I could talk about this course forever, but I should probably talk about the stuff that you guys think that might not have been that clear, or where you guys would like to hear more about it in a way. So I'll just give you a few minutes to fill this thing out here. Unless you think that the course is perfect and we don't need any reviews. But I doubt that. You know, it always helps to review certain things. The big sword, the stuff that Roland talked about. And I might talk a little bit about the format of the exam on Friday as well. Mm-hmm. Okay, why don't you just say everything? You know, just makes everybody's life easier. But no, okay, this is sort of useful. This is helpful. Then I can jump back into some of the lectures and maybe explain a little more things. So even if you have some questions related about the readings, you know, there's some stuff that you haven't understood on that. This is sort of like an opportunity to feedback on that, and to look a little deeper into that. The most important things for the exam, well, do the readings. That's the most important thing for the exam. Okay, but think about it. If there's something else on Friday, I'm going to ask the same question again, so you'll have an opportunity to bring that up. And based on that, I will think about all the fun things we can do during the last lecture. Okay, so now let me get started. So what I want to do today, as I said, now this is not relevant for the exam, but nevertheless, I hope that you find it interesting. It's some ongoing research that I'm involved in, and it kind of takes things from where we left the last time. You know, we talked about networks the last time, and we talked about people being embedded in networks. Now they experience their world through networks. And this is sort of a paper that I've been working on with two colleagues in Montreal, actually. In Montreal, actually. And it is about a particular kind of network. You know, I mentioned in the first lecture about networks that it's not all about friendship or liking or advice. You know, this is sort of what people traditionally used to think about when they talk about networks. But you know, it really is about a relational view of seeing things. And in this case, it is about denunciation. So denunciation means people pointing fingers at each other. And this is a case where we looked at, basically it was a big corruption scandal. It was the biggest corruption scandal in Canadian history. And there was a trial after this corruption scandal had been discovered and unfolded. And during that trial, people witnessed in front of this tribunal. You know, it's like a truth-finding tribunal about what had happened there. And the interesting thing is that they started to point fingers at each other, saying that this guy was involved, or that guy was involved, or that guy was involved. Yeah? And that sort of unfolded over time. And that's basically what this paper is all about. But I'll come back to that in a little bit. Yeah? So basically, this is sort of now you see how this sort of unfolds. So these are sort of the cool things that you can do when you do network analysis. This is now a visualization of how this corruption scandal tribunal unfolded over time. And what you see is sort of like the red individual. That's basically the one that is sort of speaking in front of this tribunal, or it's called a public commission. And you see the links. These are sort of like the denunciations that this particular person makes. So this person denounces other people, and then this whole thing unfolds. And originally, when we started this, I have this interest. Actually, I'm quite interested in criminal networks. I study criminals and how they are related with each other and who they co-offend. I showed you the example of the youth gang stuff that I did, and here we thought that maybe this network tells us about how this network of the corruption scandal looked like. Like who was sort of in bed with whom, like who was sort of like knowing about the other people involved in this whole thing in a way. But what we realized is, and that's what this paper ultimately is about, which is why we call it the limits of scandal, that depending on what people say at this moment in time, as this scandal unfolds, it really matters for what other people say next. Yeah. So if you point the finger at me, I'm probably more likely to point the finger back at you. And here we're basically taking networks and we're moving this one level further. We're looking at network dynamics in time. We're looking at how networks evolve. Ultimately, we want to know why do certain individuals denounce certain other individuals, depending on the structure of the network as a whole. But that's a little preface to the study. Let me first give you a little bit of a context. This is sort of Chateau Frontenac. I don't know, any Canadians here? Somebody from Canada? Quebec? Quebecois? Not really. Yeah. Actually, this is in Quebec. So I lived in Quebec for a while. It's the Chateau Frontenac in Quebec City. Quebec is actually the largest province in Canada. Is it largest? I think it's the largest province in Canada. But it's a French-speaking province in Canada. Yeah. So it used to be part of New France until 1700 something. I don't know. I can't remember. The famous battle at the Plains of Abraham. If you would be a Canadian, you would know that. And if you would be a Quebecois, this would be the saddest moment in your history, because Quebecois, they are very proud of their French origin in a way. So actually there was this famous battle in Quebec City where the English won against the British, and ultimately Canada became part of the British Empire, and the French colony sort of disappeared. However, when you look at Quebec, there's, even though now we're 250 years later, there's still a lot left over in French tradition, French culture. Yeah? So I don't know. Quebecois, people think this is a different country than the rest of Canada. So and actually this even led in the 1970s or so on to quite some uprisings. There was even terror attacks. So it was a bit like here in Ireland, although the other way around probably, that there was a strong independence movement in Quebec. There were terror attacks, there were bombs going up. And even nowadays, you still find a very strong support for Quebec independence in Canada. Yeah. So, and as soon as you move out from Montreal, Montreal is a bilingual city, great place to be, by the way. But if you move out of Montreal, everything is French. It's French speaking, although Quebecois, sort of like an interesting accent. Interesting accent. But anyway, so probably you don't know this, but it was actually not too long. Well, although now it's a little bit 20 years ago, but it was in the 1990s. There was actually a referendum. There was a referendum similar to the Scottish referendum that we had not too long ago about independence of Quebec from Canada. That was 1995. And actually, it was incredibly close. Yeah? So Quebec almost became an independent nation. But it did not. Yeah? More than 50% of the people said no, so remained part of Canada. So that what happened, Quebec remained part of Canada. Yeah? And it still is part of Canada nowadays, although nowadays, they have relatively strong autonomy and different government structures, part as a result of that, yeah. But it remains part of Canada. But the federal government realized, hang on, there's sort of like this, I don't know, big province of French separatists. We need to do something here. Yeah, we need to promote Canadian unity. Do something. And that's actually what they did. So they started in the aftermath of this independence referendum, they started a big campaign to advertise and to promote Canadian identity in Quebec. Yeah. It was a large government spending, a big contribution also to Quebecois industries and so on, and it was almost like a quarter of $1 billion Canadian dollars worth. So it was like a huge package, a lot of money that was thrown into Quebec to sort of deal with that uprising, with that independence and separatist movement afterwards, and to sort of bring people on board. But as it happens when governments take lots of money and invest it in things like this, this turned into the biggest corruption scandal in Canadian history. So there was a huge amount. So there was this government sponsorship program, as I said, like a quarter of $1 billion Canadian dollars. But the money was just terribly misused. So this turned into the biggest corruption scandal in Canadian history. And what had happened is that there was, inappropriate political interference in administrative matters, like people kind of jumped in, or there was carelessness and the incompetence in the program management. The money was just flying away, and worse, there were kickbacks to elected officials. Like some people got contracts about the marketing campaigns and all these kind of things. But they only got it because they sort of promised to get a kick. They were promised to get a kickback on this. So it was like a big thing. It was discovered by this newspaper, by this Canadian newspaper, the Globe and Mail, and it caused a huge outcry. So what did the Canadian government do? They had to deal with this corruption scandal now. This is pretty embarrassing. Like they're trying to promote unity, but people misuse the money terribly. It's like and it unveiled huge corruption. So what did they do? Well, they initiated what was called the Gomery Commission. Gomery because that was the name of this dude. It was like a retired judge. They brought him back, and they gave him the mandate to establish like a truth-finding commission, to publicly cleanse, to find out, like in a court tribunal, what had actually happened and who was involved and so on. But do this in a very public way, so that people would see and that it would be very transparent about the whole thing. And in history there have been similar things. So in Canada they have this thing of a public commission, and they use it quite often. But maybe you're familiar with South Africa. In South Africa they had similar commissions, like truth-finding commissions, in the aftermath of apartheid. Where they kind of wanted to make clear about what had actually happened during the time of apartheid, during racial segregation between blacks and whites, and this was also done in a very public way. So the great thing about these things happening in public is that as a researcher, I can actually follow exactly what had happened. So we see exactly what was going on. And in this case, this was all broadcasted on Canadian television for half a year. This was like primetime news about who said what in the Gomery Commission. So that was like a big news event, and this is sort of how it looked like. But it then was all on television. And finally, one of those guys, the guy in the middle here with the bald hat, that was actually the uncle of one of my co-authors. So that's another reason why we got interested in this. Because I have a co-author whose uncle was actually sort of involved with the mafia. Yeah. But anyway, my co-author, he's a criminologist. You would guess that they have sort of connections. An Italian criminologist in Montreal. Of course they know the mafia. Yeah. Anyway, so this is sort of like a little background story about how this thing happened. And now maybe you see where this is sort of coming in. Because ultimately, there were around 170 folks, men and women, that were basically witnessed in front of this tribunal, of this public commission, which was then broadcasted on television. And it was almost over, like a several months, like four months, this whole thing took place. Okay, now, out of these testimonies, there are transcripts available. So that means everything that anybody said, which sort of went on television, it's recorded. And these are transcripts. There's an awful amount of pages. But in that pages, that's sort of where the data is coming from. Because now we have data on when those individuals, they kind of witnessed in front of the tribunal, when they started to point the fingers at other individuals, saying, okay, I was not involved in this scandal, I didn't use the money, but this other guy did, and I know exactly how or why. And that's the kind of data that we are using here. It's denunciation data. It's pointing the fingers at each other. Okay, and now a research question that we're having here is straightforward. We are wondering, and how are those testimonies that those individuals give, they say something in front of this tribunal, how does that actually, how is that affected by what other people said previously? So, in which way does what I say in front of this tribunal, whoever I denounce or who I don't denounce, in which way does it depend on the denunciations that other people had made before? And our idea is that, or this sort of, you often start with a hunch, these kind of things, a research question, you have a hunch on this. And here our hunch is that it's not just revealing the network of how this corruption scandal looked like, but our hunch is that there's some dynamics inherent in that process of people standing in front of the trial and pointing the fingers to others, right? And that ultimately leads us to, we call that the limits of scandals. So basically what we reveal or what is being shown is sort of like the bigger, when you kind of try to go for a big score paper, and with this one, actually we are currently doing some revisions for the American Journal of Sociology, which is one of the two top journals in sociology, but this is a very general audience journal, and there you need to have a general point like this. And here our general point is that what we kind of see, what a scandal is, that's actually limited by the way how the scandal unfolded. So our hunch is that there are some underlying more general dynamics of denunciation, defining what we could then call the limits of scandal. Basically what the one guy says has an impact on what the next guy says, has an impact on what the next guy says, and so on and so forth. Yeah? And ultimately, this is sort of what shows us this the network at the end of the day. So you see, we're kind of trying to distinguish from the network that we have at the end of the day, and we're trying to think about the process that kind of led to that network in the first instance. And that's sort of where, where this is very much in line with this course with analytical sociology. We have a macro level outcome. In this case, it's this network of who denounces whom at the end of the day. But our argument is that this is the result of all those little micro steps, individuals acting in between, which then changes the world for others, which then say something and denounce somebody, which then changes again the network structure for others, and that ultimately leads to the network structure. So this dynamic process. So that's at the very, very core of this, and where this links in with all the stuff that we are doing. Anyway, well, if you're interested in how to technically do these kind of things, and I'm writing, I think I mentioned it the last time, I'm writing a book at the moment, and also the software for how to do these kind of things. So anyway, so what are sort of like substantively the things that we are thinking about that could matter here, in how this network unfolds? And now I'm going to present some general ideas. These are theoretical ideas, but then at the same time, you need to match that. You need to match that to, okay, how are you going to look at that on the ground? And I think that's crucially important, because sometimes people make big claims and, I don't know, they have grand theories and whatnot, but they just cannot match it with empirical data, or they have no way of connecting these two kind of things, right? And that's absolutely crucial. If you want to be taken seriously, this is sort of what you need to do. Or, I don't know, I have difficulties taking people serious who just don't do empirical research, who don't base their research on what they are saying, which could be very theoretical, but who don't base that on empirical data, on stuff that we actually find. Yeah? So the key is you have, but that doesn't mean that you're just focusing on the data. That's sort of like the challenge that we face. Yeah. So because some other folks, they make the mistake and they just look at the data, but that's sort of pretty wrong too. So you need to connect these two things with each other. You need to have a theoretical idea about. Ultimately, that's what a theory is. A theory is a potential explanation for something that fits in a general context. That kind of gives a coherent picture. Not that there always is a coherent picture. Sometimes there's just none. But that's sort of what it is. And here, what we are arguing is that okay, hang on, one mechanism. Sometimes we call this a mechanism. Something very small detail that matters here. A mechanism that could play an important role here. And probably you agree, is an eye for an eye. If you denounce me, I'm pissed at you. I'm denouncing you back. Or the other way around. And that's pretty straightforward. But now the question is, okay, let's translate that into a practical way and think about how we can actually measure these kind of things and then kind of see if this is sort of what we're detecting in this process of how the network unfolds. And technically, we would call this reciprocity. Reciprocity is that, I don't know, you send a tie to me and then I send a tie to you. I don't know, if you name me as a friend, I name you as a friend. Or you hate me and I hate you. It's sort of like, it's a reciprocal relationship. It goes in both directions. And, sometimes call individuals ego and alter. This is just some general names for individuals here. And reciprocity would, in this case, mean that a denunciation tie from ego to alter is more likely if a tie already exists the other way around, from alter to ego. And that's something we can actually study. That's something we can actually look at in the data. Do we find that? Do we find it that a denunciation from you is more likely to happen to me when I denounced you previously, up to that moment? So this is sort of how we're translating this mechanism. And then we look at two other mechanisms in this paper, and I'm going to talk about these other two mechanisms now too. So reciprocity or an eye for an eye, that's the first one. A second one is finding a scapegoat. Imagine this is a corruption scandal. I don't know, you're being dragged in front of the tribunal. What are you going to do? Yeah? You have to say something. So maybe you're just going to dump it on somebody, on a scapegoat, somebody that can be blamed. How could you translate that idea into network terms? Well, we would actually call this alter popularity. If you would look up in the literature, this is sort of what, it's a very technical term, but in our case, it just represents this idea of finding a scapegoat. And in this case, it means that a tie from ego to alter, it's sort of like the dashed line. If there is this finding a scapegoat thingy happening, we should find that a tie from ego to alter is more likely if alter already received lots of denunciations from others before. So other people jumped on somebody, and then I'm going to jump on that person too. I'm also going to denounce that person. And often that's a strategy that criminals use. They say they give the appearance of cooperating. They give the appearance of saying something without saying anything new, because they don't reveal anything, because this person has already been implicated by lots of other people in the first instance. Yeah? But this is sort of how we would translate this. And now, ultimately, this is what we're going to look at. We're going to look at, is a tie more likely to emerge, a denunciation tie from ego to alter, when alter, at this particular moment in time, already received lots of other denunciations from other people. Okay, so the third mechanism that we look at is punish those who talk. Again, you could make good arguments for why you would think that. It could be like to protect the group. If some people start denouncing others, then they'll get punished by others for having done so. It's like a group punishment in a way. Translating this into these practical terms, now this would look for another pattern in the network. This would look for the pattern. Now you see then the errors are just different from, now they're going out from alter. So in this case, this pattern would mean that ego is more likely to send a tie to alter when alter already denounced lots of other people in the past. And these are now three theoretical ideas that we have, three mechanisms that we think they are at play. We found a way to translating that into certain patterns that we can then detect or not detect with our data. This is sort of like then an empirical test. If you don't find these patterns, then we don't have support for finding a scapegoat, or for punishing those who talk, or for an eye for an eye. But if we do find these patterns, then we have support for these mechanisms. So that's basically what this paper is all about. But then things get complicated, and one complication, you could think maybe you thought about that already so far. Sometimes some people just happen to have nothing or not much to say, while others, they happen to talk a lot. So the thing that they're denouncing, that ego denounces alter, might have nothing to do with the network effects that I just talked about. Maybe it's just because ego just likes to talk a lot. Or maybe it's because ego just doesn't have anything to say. So people might have objectively different knowledge about that. So that's sort of one of the problems that we have. A second problem is that some people have just objectively higher chances to get denounced. So it might be nothing about the dynamics here, about the network structure that matter. It's just that this one person was just heavily involved in the scandal. And that's sort of why that person gets lots of denunciations, because there's a reason for it. So this is sort of like a second problem, and that's sort of like, technically speaking, you want to think about the baseline probabilities for some individuals to denounce others, and the baseline probabilities for some individuals to get denounced by others. And then the challenge, and this is a bit of a technical challenge, is to consider these kind of things. Ultimately, what we're going to do, we're going to have some random effects here for both ego and alter, if you're familiar with that language a little bit, that control for these kind of things while we're looking at these network dynamics. So, I don't know, it's a bit of a challenge. How can we distinguish these true denunciation dynamics, blah, 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 from then and so on, because both lead to the similar patterns. So I don't want to bore you too much with this, but time, as I always keep mentioning, time is a big ally with these kind of things. Because if it would be the thing that, let's say, one individual just was involved in the scandal a lot, and that's why this person gets denounced a lot. This is now corresponds to the green triangle. If that would be the case, this person should get lots of denunciations at any moment in time of those 4 months where it happens, right? Because that person was involved in it. And now we're assuming that nothing else mattered, that no dynamics mattered here about what you said or what somebody else said yesterday. If it really is about their objective involvement, their chance, or we call it the risk that they get denounced, should be the same, it's higher than for individuals that were not involved in this scandal, but it should be constant over time. However, if there are these dynamics that I'm talking about, that what you say matters for what I say, what then somebody else say, and so on and so forth, then the risks to get denounced is not going to stay constant. Then if you get denounced, or if you get denounced a lot, then other people might denounce you even more, and then other people might denounce you even more. That's sort of like the scapegoating thing. So that means the risks should change over time. And that's sort of like the methodological challenge. I'm not going to get too much into details, but because this is going to freak you out, because basically the way we do this is like a multi-level discrete time event history model. It's a fancy, ultimately it's just a fancy way, well, it's not even that fancy, it's very straightforward. At the end of the day, what we want to do, we want to say, why is there a tie from A to B? Yes or no? That's out of our dependent variable. And then we have independent variables which say, would this tie from A to B, would this close a reciprocal relationship? Basically, was there a tie from B to A in the past? And then another independent variable would be, like, how many denunciations did B make up to that moment in time? Which would be the alter activity effect, like the group punishment effect. Or how many other people have denounced B at that moment, which would be the scapegoating. But, this is, it's a technical challenge a little bit. We use multi-level models. At the end of the day, I don't want to talk too much about these things because it's just freaking you out. Anyway, so let me talk about the results a little bit. So at the end, we look at these relationships between different individuals, and around 1,000 denunciations occur. At the same time, we know that around 2,800 pairs of individuals, they know each other because they talk about each other, So that means they could have denounced each other. The whole point is that they can only denounce each other when they actually know something about that other person. So we want to constrain for that. So that's our data. And at the end of the day, we then run an analysis, and now you see a table is like a regression output table where there are different numbers with it. Ultimately, what you do with these kind of things, you try to predict an outcome. That's your dependent variable. In this case, the dependent variable is there a tie between ego and alter, yes or no? And then you have independent variables, which are sort of the things that you try to use to make that prediction. So is there going to be a tie, yes or no? And then depending on whether these independent variables are important or seem to be called that, are they significant? So do they help in explaining the variance of your dependent variable at the end of the day? And then you have different effects. And in this case, this is like a logistic regression. So that means the effects are, when they are positive, when there's like a positive effect, like something greater than 0, that means like an increase in the independent variable leads to an increase in our dependent variable. And for this reciprocity effect, basically, we created an independent variable which is basically 1. Well, basically, I look at the pair between you and me, and I want to know if I'm going to denounce you. That's sort of like the dependent variable. That's sort of the outcome that I'm predicting. And then the independent variable is, did you denounce me in the past? So if you denounced me in the past, the independent variable would be 1. While if you didn't, it would be 0. And using that as an independent variable, then we get like a regression output here, and the coefficient tells us whether the fact that you denounced me in the past matters for what I'm going to do. And in this case, it does matter. It's positive. It's positive for 0.7, or then in another model 1.0, and it's significant. Basically, this is evidence for this reciprocity, for an eye effect. For this popularity effect, we also find evidence. For the activity, we find evidence too. Ultimately, we find in the data evidence for these 3 patterns, which then gives us evidence for the theories that we had around that, that kind of an eye for an eye matters, or that individuals go for scapegoats, or that they punish others. So that's sort of one of the things that we did, and then you can go and look at predicted probabilities, what makes people more likely to denounce somebody if something happens, and so on. But I want to talk about some other results that we did here, because we kind of pushed this a little further. We looked yet again at timing, and we looked at, there are around 170 individuals, so we looked at maybe the dynamics of this denunciation change over time as well. So maybe it's not just that reciprocity matters, but maybe reciprocity matters more at the beginning than at the end. Or maybe scapegoating matters more at the beginning than at the end. And practically what we do, we basically split our analysis in 2 halves, and we run it again for the first half of the time, let's say for the first 2 months, and then for the next 2 months of how the whole thing unfolded. And then, we get, again, sort of like regression results here, and we can compare them with each other. And when one looks closer into it, reciprocity matters in the same way, popularity matters in the same way, but activity, the effect goes down. So basically what we find is that all those 3 mechanisms matter at the first half of this unfolding of this corruption scandal. And then for the second half of it, the group punishing effect goes away. So we did another timing analysis here. Okay, I know I'm pushing this, but it could be interesting for you to see what you can actually do. And this is sort of how my daily researcher's life looks like. We also look at expiry dates. So here the idea is maybe what somebody said yesterday matters more for what I'm going to say now compared to what somebody said 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago, or 4 weeks ago. So if you denounced me yesterday, I really remember it. I'm pissed. But if you denounced me a month ago, so many things happen in between. So I don't know, maybe I just moved on. And that's sort of what we are looking at here. So how do we do that? Well, now we actually generate our independent variables with, we call it a moving window. Let's say I only look at the last 2 weeks, and then I move through time and I only look at the last 2 weeks. That's sort of my moving window size, and only that matters for my analysis. And then I repeat the whole thing by looking, instead of 2 weeks into the past, maybe 1 week in the past, or maybe a whole month in the past. So I'm changing this moving window size, and then we repeat the analysis. There's a lot of calculations happening there. At the end of the day, we kind of get results for different, these are now our regression coefficients for different moving window sizes. Essentially what we find is that an eye for an eye effect seems to matter regardless of when you denounced me in the past. So if you denounce me in the past, I don't forget. I remember. Yeah? I'm pissed and I denounce you back. While this scapegoating effect, which is very much in line with our idea of how scapegoating actually works, this scapegoating effect really matters most recently. Yeah? So if somebody got lots of denunciations a month ago, this scapegoating effect doesn't really seem to matter that much anymore. Which is sort of another support for this mechanism actually happening there, yeah? Because scapegoating is okay, whoever is the current scapegoat is being scapegoated, is being blamed by other people. So we find some more support for that. And this alter activity effect, more or less remains the same. So in this case, time or for the scapegoating, the effect goes down. Maybe a last analysis that I want to just throw at you is we also do some triadic analysis. Yeah? So now in NetRace you can look at triadic configurations, and this is sort of where it actually becomes interesting, because then you can think about maybe the enemy of my enemy is my friend. These kind of things. Yeah? And that's exactly what we're looking at here. There's again a technical term for that. It's called a cyclical triplet. In this case, it would be like would a tie from ego to the J is now the individual on the right. Would that be more likely if these two individuals are embedded in a configuration where J denounced already K and K denounced ego? And what would that stand for? Well, actually, this would stand for the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So if you are less likely to denounce somebody who denounced somebody who denounced you. Yeah? The enemy, or go the other way around, the enemy of your enemy, if that guy is your friend, which kind of makes sense, there's balance theory and so on, which actually is very interesting anyway. Yeah? So the enemy of your enemy, why should that guy be your enemy? Because you both have a common enemy. And that's sort of what we're looking at here. If a denunciation is less likely to be there when two individuals are embedded in this enemy of an enemy configuration. And we also look at another configuration. It's like a down triple. There's a common person. I don't know. The question is, am I going to denounce you? Am I more or less likely to denounce you when there's a third party who denounced both of us together? So what do you do? Again, it's sort of very important, and this is sort of where we're coming from here. What does it theoretically mean? Yeah? Well, actually, this would be, if that would be the case, I'm saving myself. Yeah? Somebody denounced both you and me. I'm going to throw it all on you. Or I like to call this mechanism saving my own skin. Yeah? So somebody denounces both you and me. We just stand there. I don't know. Somebody caught us. Yeah? But then say, well, actually you did it. Yeah? I'm sorry. I just was not that involved because you're already being denounced, right? So throw it at. Or if that wouldn't be the case, if I wouldn't denounce you when somebody had denounced both you and me, this would be evidence for the code of silence. Yeah? Because we were both in it. We stick together, we don't nominate each other. So hopefully you get that kind of what we're trying to do here, and this is sort of how you need to think about your research. You need to have a theoretical idea, but you also need to break that down, in a way that you can measure things that ultimately gives you support for or against your proposed mechanism. Yeah? And these are sort of like the things that now you can look at in the data. Do we find these configurations that a tie from ego to J is more or less likely when there's this, a third party K who had denounced both ego and J in the past? Yeah, and actually what we do find, we find evidence for the saving my own skin suggestion. We do find some evidence for the enemy of my enemy, but it's not really significant, so we don't really overemphasize that. Yeah? So if you summarize that, what are the conclusions? And this is sort of how these papers look like. There's a conclusion here. And here we find clear evidence for the dynamics of denunciation. Previous testimonies matter for what is said next. Well, that's sort of like a first given here. But then we kind of also drill that deeper and kind of find support for various mechanisms. So for example, in eye for an eye, we find support for finding a scapegoat, especially the most recent ones, which is in line with the scapegoating idea. We find evidence for group punishment. and we find some evidence for the enemy of many is my friend, and for the saving my own skin idea. Yeah? And then if you zoom out a little more, like what are sort of like the bigger conclusions here? Well, one conclusion is that these public inquiries don't really do what they're supposed to do, which means they are not revealing the truth. They are, well, probably they do reveal some truth of it, but a lot of it, what we see, depends on how this truth-finding process unfolded over time. And that's sort of where our limits of the scandal comes into play. And this is sort of like the point that we are making, yeah? That there are these underlying denunciation dynamics. So anyway, so this is just a little excursion. I hope this sort of was a little interesting for you to see what actually what one can do here. As I said, it's not really exam relevant, but if you're excited about these kind of things, we have more courses in that direction on network analysis and so on. Yeah. So on Friday, it's going to be the group feedback, but also keep in mind on Friday, the take-home test is going to go online, and you will have time until Monday to respond to that. Yeah? Okay, see you on Friday.